All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's AAA webinar, Cybersecurity for EMS, Combating the Cyber Kill Chain, presented by GMR's Chief Information Security Officer, Mark Campbell. Before we get started, I just want to encourage everyone to please ask any questions you might have throughout today's presentation. If you're joining us on Zoom, please post your questions in that Q&A feature on your menu. And if you're joining us today from Facebook Live, please post any questions you might have in the comment section of that post. We'll try to get to your questions throughout the presentation in real time, but if not, we'll make sure to get to them at the end of the recording. We'll also be sending out a follow-up email this afternoon with a recording of today's webinar and the PowerPoint slides and any other requested information throughout today's presentation. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Mark to get us started. Thanks, Mark.
Great, and thank you. And good afternoon, probably, or maybe still good morning for a lot of individuals. First off, I appreciate you taking the time and having an interest on the information that I'll be able to share here. We're not going to be real serious about it. I like to keep things flowing fairly, I guess, nonchalantly. And if you've got questions as we move through here, please feel free to keep this an active conversation, and I'd be more than happy to try to do my best to answer your questions. So with that, again, what the title of this slide is basically this presentation is combating the cyber kill chain. And typically what would happen is my boss, Sean Tooley, who you see there next to me on the screen, is he was unable to make it at the last minute due to a conflicting meeting. So he sends his apologies in advance. So with that, we'd like to start off the presentation with something with a little bit of fun, and that's going to be taking place here on the next slide. So I'll pause.
No, come on. Okay. No.
Say your prayers, Doug. It's night time.
Finish them now.
No, what? Hey, don't pause.
Congratulations. You won a Caribbean cruise for 2. I won?
That's awesome.
No, Doug, nobody won.
Why would you squash his dreams like that?
Because that's not real.
There's a picture of a real boat. All you gotta do is click on the link for more information. Ship's finally coming in, bud. Doug sailing away. Click it.
Do not click on that link. You don't know who sent it to you. Don't take the bait.
Click it, Doug.
He's strong, Doug. Doesn't even look like that great of a boat anyway.
That's not even a real site. I didn't win anything.
You're still winning to me, bud.
Come on.
You loser.
How did it happen?
Because you're a loser.
I had the sword.
You should have played your sword earlier.
So hopefully everybody got a little bit of kick out of that. Of course, you probably don't know anybody that are like those individuals, but that's actually a video from Mimecast, who is an email security provider that's out in the wild, and very, very good solution. So as part of the cyber kill chain, some people call this CKC. It was really created in 2011 by, I think, a lot of what I like to call scientists, basically, that are trapped in the basement of a science building somewhere that don't let out much, to basically look at attacks that are out there, things that are called advanced persistent threats. So like you saw in the video, a lot of those start off with phishing attacks. So as we look at the cyber kill chain, it's really broken out into 7 different chains or links, so to speak. We've got our reconnaissance that takes place. We've got weaponization that takes place after that. So we're really talking about setting up, people out there probing, looking at your environment, trying to set up emails that might have to do something with a marketing campaign that you're setting up for your company, or just targeting individuals just in general. So based on the reconnaissance that they do, the next thing they really do is they start to weaponize a payload. So they're in the back, they are coding, they're trying to figure out what type of emails they want to send out, either with links to videos or other nefarious sites that actually have the payload as they will deliver it. So once they send that information over to your inbox, then sometimes unbeknownst to you, you end up clicking on a link, and then they consider themselves delivered the payload, and then they start an exploit after that. And we'll go into each one of these a little bit more as we make it through the cyber kill chain. So one of the things we've got out there is we always talk about bad actors. And some of those are really broken down into the levels you see here. So you typically have your cyber criminals. These are individuals that are very motivated, and they typically target healthcare organizations. And they are nowadays, versus what they used to do in the past, is they try to ransomware your organization. So they try to totally shut you down. So it takes one click from one individual to open an email, click on a link, and basically start to download and deliver some nasty malware that will ultimately lock up your laptop or the device that you happen to be on. They're doing this with cell phones nowadays as well. Depending on how they create this, the bad actors might just start to share that information, as nice as they are, to other parts of the organization. The next thing you know, the entire organization could be locked up. So cyber criminals they come in all shapes and form. It could be individuals nowadays, kids that are in school, it could be my kids. I was wondering about that at one point in my life, if my kids were doing this based on my background, but they were targeting each other actually in the house to lock up each other's systems. So now that they're adults, they can do that all they want to, as long as they're not in my house on my system. So those are cyber crimes. Then we have cyber criminals, excuse me. Then we also have nation states. And these are highly organized. These are the individuals not only that come from the United States, it's more of your organized crime type of activity. So people that are involved in Russia, people from Syria, basically any company that might end in the name Stan, so your Afghanistans, etc. We see a lot of organized crime type of figures coming from those areas. We call those nation states. And then you've got, of course, insider threat. Some individuals actually, their jobs are to migrate to the United States, or if they live in the United States, within a group that they are part of, they have a vested interest. So they want to have an insider working for that company, hopefully in a position, maybe within IT, where they can obtain privileged account credentials to systems. And then, of course, what they do is they start sharing that information. And after a while, either they want to stick around, as some of these are sick individuals, and see the damage done from within inside, or they decide to quit. And with these harvested credentials inside, they leave and they will wait maybe a week, a couple of days, or even a couple of years to utilize those credentials to their benefit. So those are some examples of insider threats. Insider threats also could be individuals that, unbeknownst to them, they actually click on a link. Again, you can quickly become an insider threat by doing something, not paying attention to an email, not paying attention to training that your organization may provide you. Next thing you know, it's the end of the day. You've got a mountain of emails you're trying to get through. You're opening them up, you're clicking, and you click on something that's bad. And then something bad does happen. And then we've got, with the rising, probably over the last, I would say 10 to 15 years, we've got these hacktivists that are out there. So companies are just basically targeted by these socio-political, environmental type of individuals sometimes that want to post their agenda. They want to make a mark on a web page. They want to deface your web pages. And typically those are not that big of a deal, and not as detrimental to the company, but they can be. So we see those type of organizations growing as well. So as we move on, again, just some interesting stats will come across the page here as far as what goes on. Again, 70% of the breaches are caused basically by external actors, and 34% of those involve internal actors. So again, it's a fairly healthy mix. Some people they don't realize that the internal actors are quite high, actually. And again, about organized crime gangs, like I mentioned earlier, really are involved with about 55% of those attacks. And again, those organized crime units can be spread out between the external actors and internal actors. So another part of some interesting stats that we have is about internet traffic. And with here, this map, Norse map, you can actually see, and we watch this when what's called our Security Operations Center. We have maps up that actually can show you where we have active threats that are coming from China, the Netherlands, Hong Kong, South Korea, you name it. As you can see, some of those listed here actually coming in, and it looks like a missile attack in the Colorado area or down in the Texas area where some of our headquarters are. So as we go through here, again, it's when we talk about internet domains, we're talking like the at gmr.net, or we're talking about the other .gov type of organizations. But the bad individuals are typically out there, and they're creating, as we can see here, over 200 new internet domains every day. So they're highly incentivized to create these domains. It doesn't cost a lot to do it. And a majority of those 200 are basically used for malicious purposes or suspicious purposes. To me, it's really the same thing. So we'll talk a little bit more about this on a few other slides about something called domain squatting. So again, a few more nice stats here about what happens in this space. So new organizations typically fall victim to ransomware about every 11 seconds. That's kind of hard to imagine. It is down from 40 seconds back in 2018, but just because of the magnitude of the amount of emails that we get across, not only in our daily lives and personal lives and accounts, but from a work perspective, we get quite a few emails. And again, depending on the email, depending on the topic, the subject, how enticing it is, people tend to love the click, and they do it quite often. And it's reflected in some of these stats. So the interesting thing was, we've got the last bullet here, 27% of attacks target banks and healthcare. Banks used to be the #1 target and vector for attacks from bad individuals or threat individuals. So now we have actually surpassed within the last the 2 years banks. So the healthcare is the #1 industry tied to malicious activity nowadays, especially when it comes to, again, you've got your phishing attacks. People have heard of spear phishing attacks. And there's also attacks called whaling that are out there as well. So they're sticking with the phishing nomenclature, and whaling is one that a lot of people don't hear about, but it's a little bit different than spear phishing attacks, where you point out and you go specifically at typically a high value target, which might be a CEO, a CFO, somebody that has sensitive information that you might gain access to, versus whaling. They will actually try to spearfish multiple people at the same level across multiple organizations. It's more bang for their buck. So it's kind of like rolling the dice, hoping that they'll get a hit on the high numbers and the payout will be great. So, and of course, we've got, and some of you may have heard about it in the news lately, supply chain attacks. So SolarWinds is a breach that has happened. It has hit a lot of organizations. I mean, they're still trying to uncover the number of organizations that are affected by SolarWinds attack. We do know that they are buried deep into government organizations. These individuals that are responsible for it are, they have already breached companies. They've already been sitting in these companies for a while. They are harvesting data, they are harvesting credentials, and they leave with that data. But they're quiet about it because they want to keep those back doors available for them to go back in and grab more data. It was just by happenstance that these individuals were identified as far as the threat vector goes. And to date, I think just based on the pure size and magnitude of this, we'll probably see a picture made for motion pictures come out in the wild within probably the next year or so, because of the success this has had for the bad guys that are out there. So I'll pause there. I'm not sure if we've got any questions or not. Okay. So as we talked earlier with the cyber kill chain, we'll continue to come back and reference this diagram. We were talking earlier about the reconnaissance that's done, the weaponization, and ultimately the delivery of the emails in this case. So. And of course, I feel so bad for that youngster, but that's kind of in a rough scenario what a phishing attack is like, right? So it's they tee you up for thinking that you're going to be looking and interfacing and communicating through one email when they actually slip you something else behind the scenes. And again, these numbers fluctuate greatly, but they are increasing. About 91% of the cyber attacks really are experienced during spear phishing. And then a lot of those, from a spear phishing perspective, actually have malware that are delivered or attached with those emails. So it's no longer the, hey, how are you doing? And trying to start a conversation from a social engineering perspective, but they want to tug at your heartstrings and get a visceral emotion from you and have you interact with a link that's on there, or to try to open a document as well. And this is a scrubbed example of one of those. And if you look at it, you go, what's the matter with this email? But when you dig a lot deeper, you start to see some things that pop up that are a little bit give you cause to pause when you're looking at this. So for example, when we get something from somebody, we've got the visual cues like EXT. A lot of companies use this now just to raise awareness that this is an email coming from an external entity. But as we start to dig a little bit deeper up top, we see portal AMR. That's not how you would typically have AMR spelled. It would be all capitals. If you look who the sender is, this is coming from a Japan domain. So it's coming from a foreign country. And then of course they're hitting this saying that it's high, so they're trying to grab your attention. They're putting cut and pasted O365 Microsoft logos here. And then they also start to look at different areas where we've prevented, again, tugging on your heartstrings to get your attention. These recovery messages, they're trying to get you to click on this link. And just by purely hovering over that, if this were a live email, you would see where it is actually redirecting you as an individual. Typically, you will also see copyrights. This is 2020. Microsoft stays pretty on top of their copyright trademarks and so forth. And this would be 2021. And then, of course, the company, if it is an external, you'll also see a lot of times at the top or the bottom that there's a caution banner saying, again, pay attention, this did originate from the outside. So using that as an example, again, 7% of the spear phishing campaigns are usually business emails that are used to just compromise the inside. And they're typically 3 times more effective than somebody coming from the outside and looking like they don't do business with you typically. So here's another example, again, coming from Daryl San Pedro. And it's basically, this is written quite a bit better, but you start to see things, how he starts it off, hello. He's trying to, again, tug at your heartstrings and say, this is urgent. And then all of a sudden the font starts to change where they cut and pasted information in here. Then they start to use bold type of letters, again, to grab your attention. So it's urgent. And here's a date that basically they want to have a response by. They're saying urgent again. And if you don't reply, here's some stuff that may happen. Your accounts could be put on hold. Then they have keywords again. We've got delays. And if they receive all the invoices, everything's going to be okay and be fine. But if we notice the remittance details, they give you account numbers, they give you routing numbers. Down here, they're saying they're Chase Bank. And also, we've got, usually this will be a capital B for broad, capital S for street. So there are things, again, that are designed to, if you actually are paying attention to what's going on here, they make you scratch your head and say, is this really something that I should reply to or not, or bring to somebody else's attention? So Pedro, of course, Mr. Daryl, he did a follow-up. So somebody may not have interfaced with these individuals. So with delay, they come up with a follow-up email request where they're, again, looking for updated information. So they've changed their ACH information from here actually to new numbers, which is a little bit odd. And the reason why they would do that is they probably reuse this email, this phishing email, and they've already had people deposit monies into this bank account. So they're following back up. They've changed the account number and also the routing number. And if you haven't noticed, they've actually switched routing number, account number, and they've done it here as well. But this is one of the ones I referenced earlier where we call typo squatting. So if you're familiar with Apcela, this is the way it's spelled, APCELA.com. If you look up his email address, he's got 2 L's, excuse me, I just went backwards. He has 2 L's in his apcelaname.com. So that's a visual cue that's very, very easy to miss. And people do that often. Some people might take the L out and they might replace it with an I. there's small visual cues that if you're not paying attention, you will miss. So just keep your eyes out, be a little bit, don't get distracted by the content of the email. Just give it a good once over. And if for some reason it causes you to pause and scratch your head, then maybe you should be sharing this with somebody else. At minimum, you don't want to interact, but you probably want to engage your company's cybersecurity team or somebody else that might know more about this individual within that same area. And typically they will target account payables, finance areas a lot of times because they know there's potentially going to be a payoff. So again, we saw this a little bit. 48% of malicious email attachments are typically Office files that come through. So they will be Word documents, there'll be Excel files. And of course, when they come across and try to engage you by clicking those, they'll either download a payload in the background. So they'll have something hidden within that file that will launch and actually download a payload that will cause significant issues to the company, usually later on. Either it could be something as them just trying to grab or interface with you to get credentials, called credential harvesting, or they may actually launch malware on your system just by doing that click. So again, take time to really review those emails to see if it's something that, one, you're expecting. If you're not expecting it, you might want to call the actual individual that they are pretending to be, and marauding as or masquerading as, and see if that person actually was sending you an email such as the ones we saw previously, and just verify. It's a simple call. But the last thing you want to do is, if it's a suspicious email, is start to reply and have a conversation with that individual or individuals. So this is an interesting stat with 1.5 million new phishing sites are created every month. And they're only active, like we talked about earlier, for 4 to 8 hours. So if we were looking back at the previous slide on one with the accounts, and then all of a sudden the account numbers changed, that's typically because they've gone out, they were successful, they were able to get somebody to deposit money into those accounts, they shut it down, and they will open up new accounts. So that's harder to track by the FBI, Homeland Security, or other nation state type of environments and or security type of local police, for example. So these are examples of impersonated sites that are out there. So Google, Chase, Dropbox, your Facebooks that are out there. These are some of the big ones that are often the bad guys pretend that they're out there to be. So they might start doing emails and they might change this L to an I to look like Google, but it's not a Google domain. This is interesting and also kind of cute, because I know my daughter would click on this if she received an email with a puppy in it, but 1 in 13 websites really lead to malware, and 85% of people posting puppy photos actually are trying to scan you. They've done a study on this. And it's something, again, that makes you stop and say, aw, and they want to entice you to start communicating with them. So it's interesting the way the sociology aspect works within email. So they come at you from all different types of angles. And again, that click rate, usually when emails come across that are bad in nature, typically there's about 27% of individuals that actually click and engage in those emails. So moving on in the kill chain, as we start to look at the next section, as you start getting further through the email chain, you're basically hitting where it was delivered. You end up getting breached, and the risk starts to increase all the way through the additional kill chain pieces, to where you clicked on an email, you've been exploited. So they've got code that's basically executing on your system now. That could be your local laptop or desktop. That could be a server in the background that's exploited. And then as they do that, they're in the background quietly installing this malware on you as a target, to where they can gain what's called CNC, command and control. So once they have delivered the payload and it is installed, they are quietly in the background communicating out to their servers. So they're reaching back out into possibly another country. And what they do at that point is say, okay, they know they've got a foothold. They know they're communicating actively in our environment. and they start to communicate back with the malware, and they update that malware constantly to try to gain additional information. So they'll run a command. The command will go out and try to gather data. If they see that it was successfully able to get into a database, the individual on the other side may even come in to our environment or your environment and mimic being with their hands on the keyboard. They'll start entering commands on that system inside your environment to pull data down as quickly as they can. And part of that also is that they start to exfiltrate your data. They start to steal your data, which typically has a value. The more sensitive that data, the higher value they have. And the longer they will stay in your environment until hopefully some type of security measure or a individual identifies that something's going on that's nefarious in nature and doesn't smell right. And then when they get to a point within the command and control structure, is they will actually lock up. If it's malware related, they'll lock your system, and then they will start another connection with what's called a Tor, where they will start to demand payment. They'll lock it, you come in, you'll see, and in some of the other screens that will come up, an interaction where they're asking you to make payment if you want to have that system restored and or your data given back to you or us, for that example. And these are some of the examples from, what they do, and their actions are pretty ruthless, how they talk with you, communicate, and demand payment a lot of times. And they go from something very simple like text and notepads type of activities to more of this type of interaction where they start to do countdowns. You have so much time in order to unencrypt your information. And as the clock runs down, the cost starts to wind up. And the longer you wait, the more it's going to cost you and or your company. So these are just some examples of some of these, kind of like David Letterman's top 10 list. For those of you that are, I guess, old enough to remember David Letterman, I think I'm dating myself here. So, if we look at just one, the issues is, over 500,000 patient records were stolen, but that's because there was a laptop that was stolen. Same thing with number 3, where they basically had improper records disposal. Somebody basically takes information, throws it into a trash can, and it's not shredded, for example. So somebody was able to actually pull, again, over 500,000 patient records. And the rest of these are really related to phishing and malware and ransomware. So, you've got to be really careful just in how you handle data in general. So everything from what's sitting on your desktop, to which you want to usually have a policy in place to ensure that you've got what's called a clean desktop or a clear desktop, all the way down through how you dispose of that data, and also dispose of devices. So it's not only that you might leave your laptop in a hurry to go to the gym on the backseat of your car where somebody can see it. And if that person has a bad mindset, they do what's called a smash and grab. They break your window and they grab your laptop and they run off. And that might be your laptop or a corporate device. All the way through the, just again, throwing trash. You might think that you're just disposing of it properly, but you're not. You're just throwing sensitive data into a trash can. And when we talk about laptops, it's also important that as you dispose of those laptops, you don't just send the laptop back to who you think might be somebody that's going to repair that laptop. You really should be sanitizing that hard drive, pulling the hard drive out. If the device is end of life and we need to destroy that device, we need to do what's called shredding of that hard drive most of the time, so that any of the data is definitely removed, or it is appropriately wiped using the appropriate tools. So again, we see these ransomware attack type of messages in the headlines all the time, depending on groups that you belong to, but the healthcare industry vertical is popping up all over the place. And part of that is when they had the 2020 World Economic Forum, when they were looking at risks, the cyber attacks actually hit the top 10. Do I actually agree with the placement of where cyber attacks fall within the likelihood and the impact to organizations? Not really, maybe because I'm closer to how these hit us and hit other organizations, but just the pure fact that cyber attacks have reached the top 10 list from a global forum perspective is pretty impressive. And it means that there's a lot that needs to be done from an oversight perspective to protect data and protect the healthcare industry from these type of attacks. So again, we start to get into dollars and cents here. So the average cost, $8.19 million per breach, and it goes up from there. We did see an increase in 2019 from 5.3. And with what I mentioned earlier today with the SolarWinds breach, that number is going to go up exponentially. So just the cost of a record, if we take a look at it, the industry average is $146 per record. So if they grab my information, my associated healthcare information, and try to sell that on the street, it's typically going to be about $429. Now, as we start to do that, we start to see that the numbers actually, the more you get, the less typically it costs, because bad guys like to buy in bulk. It's like going to Costco. What can I get the most of for the cheapest price? So global ransomware damages are projected to hit 20 billion this year. It's a 57% increase over where it was in 2015. So again, as we start to look at how do we stop this as far as things go, 53% of successful cyber attacks infiltrate organizations without being detected. So this gets back to like the SolarWinds attack that I mentioned earlier. They happen, they're successful, they're sitting in your environment, they're gathering data. The more data they can gather, the more successful they are, and the more they can sell that for. And about 91% of all of those incidents, they don't even generate an alert. So nobody knows what's going on. They're freely coming and freely going in your environment. And they basically are loading up a shopping cart full of your data and taking that back to their headquarters so that it can be packaged for sale. Part of that, as you digest the information, is that it takes, 2019, it takes about 206 days to really identify that something has happened in your environment. Again, they're very quiet, they're very cautious. Excuse me. And the average breach life cycle is about 314 days. So we're talking about a year plus from the time it takes you to identify that a breach has happened, the amount of time they've been in your environment to actually remediate that breach, get them out of your environment. And hopefully you can do that in a safe manner to where you're minimally impacted from a monetary perspective. So as we look at this, we've got to take a look at the strategies. They must be focused. They must be adaptive, because you could have one strategy that works for one scenario, but you're going to get hit again, and that same strategy does not work to combat the new threat that was introduced into your environment. So you've got to be flexible, you've got to be agile, you've got to be able to move quickly when you do suspect that something's going on in your environment. So it's, cybersecurity is like physical security. It's basically every team member's responsibility, and you need to look at it from that perspective, and you need to sell it that way within your organization. Just one person, just for example, my team at Global Medical Response, we can't protect the enterprise by ourselves. That's why we educate individuals, and we have sessions like this so that everybody understands that they do have a part in the overall strategy for success. So again, if you see something, raise the awareness. Don't feel bad that you have to ask somebody or double check with somebody, is this email real? I'd rather have somebody ask me on a team or within our company if something is real. Come to me every day if you want to. It's okay. I'd rather you second guess it than take action and click because you think you're bothering me or my team. If you do get impacted, one of the last things you want to do is, one, don't cover it up. Don't be ashamed. It's your corporate duty to bring and raise that awareness to somebody. You're doing better that way by raising awareness than you are by trying to cover up your tracks, because ultimately it will be found. But again, if you have a feeling that you clicked on that email, that your computer starts to act a little weird, or it's doing something out of the norm, don't reboot, kind of back away from your computer, keep your hands off, don't delete the emails, and call the appropriate contact within your organization and let them know that, oops, I think I did something wrong and we probably need to take care of it. So just raise that awareness. There's nothing to be shy about that. Actually, it shows that you're taking good corporate responsibility by doing the right thing. So getting a little bit more to home and protecting yourselves there. So they're not just going after corporations, they're actually coming after you as an individual, your family, your friends, your colleagues, especially nowadays with COVID. We've got to not only protect our devices at work, we've got to protect the devices that you're taking home to your environment. And not everybody, of course, has $1 million budgets to go out and buy the latest and greatest and best security software. So sometimes they're working at home on their personal devices, on old laptops, on operating systems that are no longer supported by Microsoft or others. Their home routers are not being patched, or by maybe their cable provider. Like my kids, they're playing around trying to hack my own home network to find out how they can get to websites that I block. And I find them doing that. I used to find them doing that all the time. All my kids are out of the house, of course, by now. But we need to protect data that's out there. So how do we, from a Mark Campbell corporate responsibility perspective, help protect our devices in your home? And we install things such as VPNs, two-factor authentication. Just because we use that at home, it's a best practice to protect yourself, to make sure that you make things such as your homeworks extremely hard. It's kind of a pain to do that, but you can create what's called a passphrase, something you remember that might be 12 to 20 characters long, but you can remember it easily. You type it in. You replace things like the capital letter E with a 3 that's reversed. Wherever you see a letter L, you might replace a capital, not a capital 1, but a number 1. That helps. Multi-factor authentication. When you're logging into your banks, for example, typically nowadays, most people, if you're not doing it now, I would highly recommend that you do is set up, again, what they call 2FA or MFA, multi-factor authentication, so that if you're logging into your bank account, the next thing that happens is you should expect to get a ring on your cell phone or an email with a code that you have to enter back into that session with your bank. If you're sitting at work or you're sitting at a movie theater and all of a sudden your phone goes off and gives you a text message with 6 digits or otherwise, you'll probably know that somebody's trying to get into your account, and you should probably give it the appropriate attention at that time. So it's a nice heads up and a way to identify that somebody is trying to do something and or steal your data and or your money. Also, become familiar with tools that are out there now with your credit reporting agencies. Some people and some companies provide you this as free for a year, 6 months, or as part of a breach. But you need to have the ability, if you think something is weird going on or you've lost your credit cards or otherwise, you have the ability to go in and freeze and lock your accounts until you can find that credit card or replace that credit card with a new one. Identity protection services, they're out there. It's not just for individuals now. You can actually sign up your entire families. Again, I highly recommend them. The charges nowadays are worth it. It's basically an insurance policy for you and your family in case somebody were to be breached. The last thing you want to do is get caught up in a situation to where somebody has stolen your identity, because protecting yourself, reissuing credit cards, reissuing everything almost in your life is very, very difficult. And by the time you find out that your personal information has been stolen, somebody's probably starting to set up accounts in your name, which is ultimately going to damage your credit. One thing that people don't understand is debit cards. They think it's the same thing as a credit card. Debit cards typically don't have the same protections as credit cards. And the nice thing about debit cards, if I were to steal one of those, is I know that what's in that account is available for me to steal now. Versus a credit card, I've got to go in, I've got to try a small number of transactions to see, one, if the card is alive, it hasn't been maxed out. Where a debit card, I know I could go in there once, see if I'm able to get in there and grab the money that's in that fund and steal it. And then again, as I mentioned previously, just have good cyber hygiene at home. And that's basically making sure that any of the devices that you have at home are up to date. That would include your routers from your cable provider like Xfinity, Comcast, or otherwise. They usually will push updates on a nightly basis nowadays that you're unaware of to help continue to provide security for those devices. But what about the laptop you're using or your kids are using? If you're sharing those devices, sometimes people don't think about, they just want to pacify children and keep them quiet versus identifying where they're going to, the sites they're going to, which a lot of times these days are gaming sites. And gaming sites are great places for individuals and cyber criminals to hang out because the kids can't wait for the next version of a Mortal Kombat to come down. So they download that, infecting your computer. Then later on after work, you might get on to take care of some family baking business. Meanwhile, you've got a keystroker and updated and installed on your computer, and they're capturing all your credentials for your bank. So that's where it would be extremely important to have multi-factor or two-factor authentication built in, just in case, because that person could have your credentials, they've captured it, now they're off somewhere in another land trying to log into your account, but your phone keeps going off and trying to provide you with this two-factor code. So those are things you definitely want to take notice of and not ignore. Some of these things, you'll see these on gas pumps or not. A lot of people, they just go up to a gas pump or an ATM and they want to instantly stick their card in there because they're in a hurry, they're paying for gas, or they need money because everybody's hungry, yelling at them, they want to go out and get food. So be careful where people input these skinners. This one's pretty obvious. You don't see it here, but you do see it here. One of the things I've taught my family, and I still do, is that when I go up to a gas pump, I will grab this area here and I'll give it a little bit of a twist. You know, not hard, I'm not trying to break or damage their devices, but a lot of times if you just grab that and pull it towards you a little bit, you'll see sometimes if it's got a skimmer on it that covers this entire area, you might see it disconnect. It might pull off and you'll see this skimmer underneath. Again, be very careful because all this is doing is that you're putting your card in, pulling your card out. And this skimmer is reading your data on your magnetic strip. So what do? You're going, it's not reading for some reason. You pull it out, you wipe it off on your pants, you stick it in again. And then it doesn't read it. It's not giving you the expected result, which is to allow you to next select which gas type you have or punch in your pen. So a lot of people, they'll just put their card back in their wallet, they'll pull out another card and they'll stick it in and they'll pull it out. So you're constantly giving information away. Also, when these skimmers usually come as a package deal, if there is a skimmer here associated on here, sometimes there's usually, especially on ATMs, there's a camera installed in one of the corners of that area, or off behind you, somebody has attached something to a pole. So as you stick your card in, pull it out, it reads it here. It actually also activates it here. And then you put in your PIN number to be able to get money out, or you might put in a PIN number for your credit card at a gas pump. And that camera actually captures your PIN number. But it doesn't stop there, because where there's a keyboard, usually there's an overlay on top of that as well. So these people come in the middle of the night, they go to the furthest gas pump away, for example, or unsuspecting ATM, they will put these devices on probably in less than 2 minutes. They'll put this on, they'll install a Wi-Fi camera, and they'll also take a fake keyboard and lay it over top of the other keyboard that's attached by tape. So every time you press your keyboard, that keyboard is capturing the digits that you're inputting there. So just, from a physical security perspective, just be careful of those things because they do exist, they are real, and they do steal data that way, and they are very, very successful. So with that, I will leave you with this piece. Sean put this in there, he thought it was funny. But it actually says we've narrowed our security risk down to these two groups. Everyone who works here and everyone that doesn't work here. And obviously there's some truth to that. It's just a matter of identifying who those threat actors are, because at the basic end of the day, that's really who they are. It's people that do work at the company. I hate to say it, but they do exist. And there are many, many outside. And I was sharing with Meg and I was sharing with Amanda earlier that typically other places I've worked in, places such as GMR, in order for us to protect our environment, we usually see people trying to get our environment into the millions a day which typically translates to about 15 million a week of just bad actors that are knocking on our front door, our website, and sniffing around trying to get inside through that method. So with that being said, I will open it back up for questions if anybody has any.
Mark, it's Randy. Hey, sorry I was a little late getting on. And thank you again for doing that. And I'll let Sean know that he's really not needed whatsoever. So it won't be the case. So a question from Alan is, can you talk about password management tools like a RoboForm and LastPass, whatever, your opinion on those?
I use them. I use them myself. I started off when, of course, everybody starts to, the more you interact on the internet, the more passwords typically you have. I used to use LastPass. I've used FirstPass. I would definitely go with the one, even on Microsoft's latest versions, they're built into the systems nowadays, and you don't have to pay for these services. And we're starting to see things such as FirstPass and LastPass go away because Microsoft and other operating systems are now sharing that amongst your different devices. So if you enter it on your laptop, it'll actually sync up with your devices, such as your cell phone. I have actually started to get away from doing that. And I just really, like I mentioned earlier in this session, was I created a passphrase that's unique to each site that I visit or different sites that I interact with, even with the banks. I use the same passphrase, which is usually about 30 characters long, and I just substitute some of those in there. So all I've got to do is remember one passphrase, which might be a combination of birthdays, addresses, things of that nature. I don't go to that level because that's discoverable on the internet. Somebody can find out where I live, right? So I just do something a little bit different. I'm not going to share it here, of course. But I do have the same passphrase. I do use that across every site that I do interface with, but I do change up enough digits in there to where it is very unique. And if somebody were to try to hack that password, it would probably take them using a very powerful computer over a year. But by the time they get to that, I've already changed my password multiple times anyways.
Great.
Hope that helps.
Great. So another point that you brought up, an interesting one. So we've all got old devices at home, be it old laptops, old desktops, whatever. And obviously we all think in terms of, at least those of us who have been schooled by you. And for those, I just want to give Mark an absolute credit. We just recently, and he's dealing with it now, had a serious hack again. And the way they handled it has been amazing. It really, the important point that Mark did was, and Sean and the team has done is, listen, folks, it's out there. Please tell us, do not hide anything. We want to get in there and help you. That's just been huge, And I want to thank you for that customer service on top of you politely saying, because I don't want to have to come rip your throat out because you didn't follow a simple rule. But here's my point. Sorry to divert a moment there. So we got an old laptop. So we give it to one of the kids or one of the grandkids or whatever. And because the operating systems are older, would you say in today's world that's probably not a good idea, or what would you think?
It's I can tell you what I do personally, and what I would recommend is if you're going to be passing down a laptop to one of your children or somebody else, your wife, your husband, or relative. First thing I would do is if you've been using it personally, I would reinstall the operating system flat out. I would scrub the device because you don't want to hand it down where you've been doing banking on there. You've got information cached in memory, or personal files that your son or daughter, for example, were to connect to a gaming site, then they're downloading these free software packages and or games, then most likely included with that free is free malware. And what that'll do is it only does it, capture what they're doing, what's new, but it'll sit back there and steal data based on the old stuff that might be there. It depends on what you can afford to do too. I mean, if you can always afford to buy new and great, not everybody can. And I can't always do that either with four children. Actually, they're young adults now. But best practice is if it's a end of life, end of maintenance type of device, I would get rid of it. It's hard to throw away a computer. But there's a reason why things go end of life, end of maintenance. They're no longer supported. Your operating system is out of maintenance. The bad people out there know that, and they will target your device. And next thing you know, they're talking with your children online, where it might be, they might think they're interfacing with somebody, a gaming partner, but it's a pedophile. Let's just go worst case, for me at least. So when I've done this with children, I've actually gone out and I've bought a new hard drive for those devices. I go to the extent of taking my hard drive, I take it out to the garage, I drill holes in it, I shake out everything in it, and then I stick it into the dishwasher on sanitize, and it melts the plates inside there with some of your older type of hard drive. So I'm fairly drastic. Can you go out there and take hammers to it? Oh yeah, we know some political figures that have done that in the past as well. So that does not equal wiping a drive. That's my, it's just to answer your question, Randy, I would bring it current if you can with the newest operating system that is out there. Totally just wipe the device from what you had personally, so that if and when that device is compromised, most likely it's just using information that your children have put on there.
Great. Another question that popped up from Damien Ricard is, do you have any recommendations for IT assessment guidance how-tos? Be words of advice or a site or a guidance book?
Yes, actually, there's a few places. If you want to get the most bang for your buck from an assessment perspective, and especially if you're building raising awareness for yourself, educating yourself. If you're trying to look at it from a company perspective, they've got the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's called NIST, N-I-S-T. If you go to nist.gov, they've got a boatload of information out there. You won't be able to read it in a year. But if you look at something called NIST 800-53, that's a standard that's used actually for the Department of Defense. And it outlines every domain that you would want to take into consideration to apply at your business. And sometimes it works at home too. It's overkill, definitely. But if you're not a Department of Defense or government entity, I would go with a watered down version called NIST NSF. So Nancy, Sam, Frank. And that stands for, CSF. So that's Cybersecurity Framework. So NIST CSF, Cybersecurity Framework. That's a very watered down version of the NIST 853. That's a great place to start. And by all means, if you've got additional questions about this, feel free. I have no problem with Megan and Amanda sharing my corporate email address, and I'd be happy to help educate you on there, because that's just part of doing my job, helping others. I don't just do this for GMR. I do it for my family, my friends, and people such as yourselves.
Perfect. And we'll finish up here, Mark, and it's great. A couple notes from Amanda. See if I can put these kind of in a sequential sort of. So obviously we've heard noise about, free internet, Starbucks, some top retailers like that, or locations. So the risk associated with that. And then are there greater risk associated with mobile devices retrospectively to a laptop or a desktop?
The first one, so your Starbucks, right? Everybody wants to sip their coffee, eat their breakfast bagels, and get on the internet and read the newspaper.
In the pre-COVID days.
Exactly. The first thing that I would actually do is you don't even have to invest in them. A lot of times, like Microsoft, they've got something called VPN, Virtual Private Network. I would use that. They also have them for mobile devices as well. I have those installed and everything. So what it does is it creates a private tunnel, so to speak, so that from your device over to exactly where you're looking to go. So if you're sitting at Starbucks on their network and you've got to do some type of online banking, have a VPN in place. And you can easily look up Norton, Symantec, look up Microsoft. They have their VPNs that you can turn on with their products as well. You can nowadays with your AT&Ts and any other mobile provider out there, they usually provide you with some type of VPN capability. They will charge you sometimes. It's usually maybe $5.99 a month, sometimes $5.99 a year. But ask your provider, especially if you've been using these providers and they value you as a customer, tell them you want it for free. You don't know until you ask, and most people will give it to you versus losing the larger bill, which is your mobile account. So just ask.
And then the reference, and we'll finish up here, Mark. Is there security differences between a mobile device retrospectively to your laptop or your desktop?
Security, I would say, if you would have asked me this probably 5 years ago, I would say your mobile device, as far as your cell phone, is much more secure. Nowadays, if you look at that cell phone, the new iPhones, the new Androids that are out there, they get more computing power than those older laptops that you're looking to hand down to your children, right? Some of them are more powerful than some of the newer laptops that are out there. So when it comes to security, I could use it as a blanket statement. Just exercise good cyber hygiene. It's hard to say 5 times fast, but just execute. See, there it goes again. Good cyber hygiene across the board with all of your devices. I would say primarily when I do my online banking, I tend to do it from a tablet or my mobile device, like cell phone, through their mobile apps, versus sometimes I do it even on my personal computer. I feel that my personal computer is very, very secure, and I don't have a problem using that. But just in case, if I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those devices, I'll just go to my cell phone. Now it's different if I had my cell phone and I were to use my cell phone to pacify my children. That's different. Yeah. Again, my device could be dirty and I wouldn't even know it without having the appropriate controls on there. Excellent. Did that answer your question?
That did. So listen, on behalf of all of us at AAA and everyone, Mark, thank you so much. It's been incredibly important and knowledgeable and important to hear about these aspects that are hitting all of us daily, as you well know. Amanda, Megan, thank you so much for putting this together. Those of you who may have more questions, Mark's email address is available through Amanda or Megan, or we can get it to you. You can send it to me. I can get it out. I'll send you all his passwords and all his codes, not a problem. And we look forward to seeing many of you on our next webcast on critical topics going on. So again, to everyone for spending an hour today, thank you very much. And Mark, let's get back to what's going on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. And thanks to everybody that what they do for us. Appreciate it.